Friends, a very good morning to all. I, Jitendra Lohia, on behalf of Association of Corporate Advisor and Executive, welcome you all to this session uh, at 11. Friends, as you all know, we have been organizing this session daily during the lockdown period for past 35 days, and we are nearing 50 such sessions on varied topics. And today's session is with none other than Senior Advocate Sumant Batra on the topic the insolvency industry in post COVID 19 world. We welcome you, sir. Sumant sir is already has already joined. Uh, Before friends, we start the session. We have other session lined up in next coming few days. Tomorrow we have a panel discussion at 11 a.m. On the same Zoom link. The topic of the session is young entrepreneurs' perspective on evolvement of business post COVID-19. And we have as a panelist Mayank Jalan, Keventer Agro, Mehul Mohanka of Tega Industries, Keshav Hajanka of Century Plywood. Friends, then on 1st May at 5 p.m., we have we have a session on the topic emotional wellness 360-degree, mental health, the lockdown and beyond. And this session will be taken by Ms. Meenu Bhudia and Priyam Bhudia. Friends, these are the sessions which has been lined up, and one more initiative which the ACE has taken. I would like to tell the participant over here that we have come out with an e-bulletin where we have brought every circular and notification at one place. So it's just a web link wherein you get updated bulletin and notification on under any act actually which has come down during the lockdown period. So we'll be sharing the link with you, and this link is being regularly updated with all new notifications. So please do visit the link, and also you must share the scene with your other group members and other friends. Friends, with this, the today's topic, friends, is about what would be the world whether in the insolvency industries post this COVID scenario. There are many, you see, suspicion in our mind. No doubt there has been a success in IBC post its implementation in the past 3 years. But now you see with the raising of limit of filing of cases with the NCLT to 1 crore, and there is also possibility of suspension of section 7, section 9 and 10 because of you see the government is or rather all the stakeholders we are also fearing that there might be spike in n number of insolvency cases due to this COVID and lockdown issues. So this suspension, which is the ordinance, is just to be notified. But yes, it is coming for sure, which might be for 6 months, or which might be applicable for all the cases which have been filed, or the new default that has to be seen. And yes, we also have doubts in mind that what will happen post this. You see, the suspension period is over. Whether this suspension will be renewed for other 6 months, or whether what will happen to the already existing NPA cases, which was there even before this COVID crisis. So you see, the business were not being the business, the promoter were not being able to run the business as a going concern. So there would be a further deterioration of the asset value because of this suspension. And yes, one major thing which we have all in mind, and which most of the stakeholders is right now thinking, whether will we get any investor or taker for the asset which is available under the insolvency regime. So whether the main sole objective of value maximization would be achieved, or whether at all there would be any investor for taking up the valued asset. So these are the questions which keep on popping in our mind, friends. And yes, I mean maybe nothing can be usually discussed for sure, but yes, today we can discuss what could be the possible scenario post this COVID. So with this, we have with this question in our mind, we have with us none other than the advocate Sumant Batra. Friends, I have heard of him since I knew Insolvency. It's like basically knowing him and Insolvency together. So I mean, most of us has connected today are IPs over here. So we must have known him for last 3 years. Uh, so let me, but you see, it's my privilege to introduce him to this uh, to this session. Sri Sumant Batra is an insolvency lawyer of international repute, social commentator, and thought leader. Sumant Batra is past president of Insol International, a senior international insolvency and creditor. Just a second. Yes. Creator right consultant to the World Bank Group, rated as number one insolvency lawyer by Legal 500 for many consecutive years. Insolvency Lawyer of the Year 2017, 2018 by Corporate Livewire Global Awards, India Insolvency Game Changer of the Year Award 2017. Mr. Sumant is an independent insolvency consultant and currently leads the insolvency practice of Kesar Das B Associates, a leading Indian law firm co-founded by him in 1993. He's the only Indian lawyer with over 20 years of both Indian and international experience under insolvency. He is chief mentor of Insol India, president of SIPL, a think tank on insolvency, and member of advisory committee IBBI. He is designated as a professor at practice by the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. He is visiting faculty in National Law University, Delhi, National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, National Collegium of National Company Law Tribunal, and insolvency professional licensed by IBBI. A cultural champion, Suman Sir is the founder and architect of a member of innovative creative project by to promote Indian heritage, culture, art, and literature. An avid collector of memorabilia, he is probably the largest collector of Indian cinema memorabilia and has founded Chitrasala, a private museum of Indian vintage popular cultural art. He is also author of best-selling coffee table book, The Indians. With this, friends, let us all welcome Advocate Sumant Batra before us. And yes, I would like to add while reading the CV about his profile, wherein he is. It says that he is a collector of largest collector of Indian cinemas memorabilia and has co-founded Chitrasala. Sir, a few minutes. We would like you to tell us about uh, uh, this aspect of yours. Sir, over to you.
Okay. Yes, unmuted now. Can you hear
Yes, sir,
me?
you are unmuted. Yes, I can hear you.
Namaskar to you, Loya Saab, and to all of you who are plugged in at the moment. And thank you so much, Loya Saab, for a very generous introduction. So very kind of you. I will certainly talk about my interest in cinema in the later part. We'll spend about 5 minutes on that because that is what has actually been keeping me alive and active during the lockdown. To begin with, allow me to start on the topic. I don't know how many of you have actually read my book on insolvency, which was released by the finance minister just a few days after the IBC was notified. I have actually extensively dealt in my book in the chapter on the history of the development of insolvency law from inception. I'm talking about 200 centuries. In particular, how the modern insolvency law evolved. And as we speak here, we actually are sitting on the cusp of another major shift in the thinking of the insolvency industry. You will find, if you read my book, and also generally if you do some research in the public domain, you will find that every single major event that has taken place globally of the scale anywhere close to what we are currently experiencing, whether it is in the form of a pandemic, epidemic, economic crisis, wars, or other kind of conflicts which have deep ramifications, not just on the economy, but on the society, as well as on the individuals at a mass level, we have seen a major shift in the thinking of the policymakers in almost all aspects of life, law, policy that impacts individuals and their life, and of course, wealth creation. And therefore, insolvency has also gone through these kind of dramatic changes in the history. One of them, or at least three, if I may say, or maybe four that I can recollect, which could be stated to be in the most recent memory of history, is starting from the early 20th century, when the largest global recession known to the humanity was experienced, started from the US and then spreading to the rest of the world, in particular the Europe. It was the countries that US traded with in those times. That was actually the first time when the global community experienced a shift in the insolvency law thinking. And from a punitive character, it acquired a reformist character. Insolvency was always considered very stigmatic, as something which could even attract uh, death penalties in many jurisdictions. For the first time, when the global financial crisis of early 1900s, in the first decade or this beginning of the second decade of 1900s started, US reviewed its bankruptcy code, and in a very big major policy shift, relaxed the provisions of foreclosure. And the courts started to grant reliefs on foreclosures to the various parties, which was unheard of in the past, because foreclosure, it was considered to be sacrosanct. If you have in any manner defaulted on your foreclosure, on your loans, then the lender could just intervene, take possession of the asset through court or through appointment of a receiver. And then in as an evolution of that, towards the later part of 1930s, we saw another major amendment in the US bankruptcy code. The second major change happened when the Second World War took place, and which destroyed the economy of most European countries. And that was the time when UK started its thought process on a relook on the insolvency law. And we saw a major committee being set up, which worked for more than 1 decade, and ultimately came out with the amendments in the Companies Act of UK, which introduced the concept of creditor in possession insolvency law, a shift from the earlier liquidation concept. And we saw major changes being made to that effect over 10 years. And Indian IBC is based on what UK introduced then. And then, of course, we saw another amendment in the 70s in US in introducing Chapter 11, what we saw, what we see today as debtor in possession law globally, including what was in the form of SICA in its earlier empire. And then, of course, we saw the Asian financial crisis, which triggered another major shift in the thinking of the insolvency uh, policymakers, thinkers, uh, the other stalwarts, when we introduced the concept of out-of-court restructuring. For the first time in Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Korea, these four countries in particular, who were hit the hardest by the Asian financial crisis as a result of the failure of Asia Pulp and Fiction enterprise based out of Indonesia, which had a global footprint. We saw for the first time bad banks being set up, where the state actually acquired the non-performing assets of various banks and tried to restructure. An exercise which didn't really work as well then, but over a period of time, it has been made more sophisticated in Brazil, Mexico, Chile, and a number of other countries. The out-of-court restructuring worked very well. And in India as well, when CDR was introduced, inspired from this exercise by the RBI, it worked very well, but for some of its flaws, which are very peculiar to India. But having said that, even then, CDR mechanism was an inspiration for many other countries. And then, of course, we saw the 2008 financial crisis, which was Lehman triggered. Again, a number of policy changes were introduced around the world. I don't want to dive too deep into them, but at least I have been a part of 25 years of exercise globally, which have taken place as a result of these activities that have taken place or as a part of the evolution from the past. And today also, we are experiencing something which will lead to, again, dramatic thinking around the world on how insolvency law need to adapt and adopt to the current circumstances. It doesn't happen ever overnight. This is a process that takes place over a period of 5 to 10 years. The industry is already thinking about it at the global level. Some countries have already reacted. India has also reacted by introducing one ordinance, which basically raises the threshold for filing from 1 lakh to 1 crore, which is already in effect. And then, of course, the other which the government is thinking of is bringing out the ordinance to suspend section 7, 9, 10, which has not been affected so far, but the cabinet has approved it, which is only a temporary measure because that won't really be a solution forever. We still will have to see how we can deal with the situation. Now, before I get into the more specifics of the IBC, one more comment that I want to mention is that IBC or insolvency law should not really be perceived from a pure and simple prism of a domestic law. We shouldn't really see it as from a very limited perspective. And insolvency law has a global kind of an implication and ramifications. And it also has social and humane and even cultural ramifications. And therefore, to a large extent, this is a thinking that has to be done not just by the domain ministry like corporate affairs ministry or the finance ministry. This is something invariably which will have to be thought through by the state governments, have to be thought through by social and welfare ministries and a number of other ministries that will provide inputs, because an insolvency law has a great bearing on not just the economy, but also in the society at large. Now, if you see this from a collective 360-degree perspective, the impact is going to be huge. It already is huge, and we should be willing to, witness some very major changes at the macro level and at the micro level. Let me just speak a little bit about the macro level. At the macro level, you will see that in order to salvage the economy from further damage, the government would think very seriously whether for the next few years, the focus should actually be more on out-of-court restructurings that are not under the pressure of timelines like those that are in NCLT, or that are not in the control of third parties like NCLTs, or which are not subject to the uncertainties which you experience again under the IBC as a result that you may have a resolution applicant or you may not have a resolution applicant. You may end up in a winding up or you may actually come out successful through a resolution plan. Now, these kind of uncertainties create pitfalls which the economy, being so fragile and volatile as it is at the current stage, will not be able to afford. So the government would want certainly a more secure, certain, speedier, and something which the banks would be able to call the shots in, and also which will not in any manner be as expensive as IBC often can be as a result of various stakeholders, litigation, and some of the other costs that are involved. Another reason, of course, why the government would need to actually invest more in the out-of-court restructurings is that Indian distress asset market, any which ways, was at a very nascent stage. Also, the drying up of the liquidity, whatever little liquidity that existed, because Indian economy was also not in a very healthy state when the lockdown started. And given that scenario, we also, the government would be aware that finding resolution applicants through a process of IBC is going to be challenging. And even though people might come forward, the valuations are not going to be attractive enough for the lenders, and it may constrain them to actually then not take decisions and eventually ending the corporate debtors into liquidation. The next reason why the government would want a more secure and certain process is the job saving. The government would not want to create uncertainties in the minds of those employees and workers and labor that is employed in distress situations in the distress companies which are facing the threat of insolvency or may face the threat of insolvency, by multiplying their anxieties at this point in time when any which ways they are threatened by the slowdown. So protecting jobs is going to be another great priority of the government, and therefore they would also not want to force companies into insolvency, and you will see that out-of-court restructuring is something which they would prefer. One more reason why the government would need to any which ways rely more on the out-of-court restructuring is the Section 29A serving as a constraint. As I said, the distressed asset investors, any which ways we don't have a developed market. We would rarely find resolution applicants coming forward, and those that come forward offering attractive price. And therefore, the promoters might just end up being the best bet, in particular where there is no trust deficit with the lenders. And if the lenders are willing to give the promoters a new chance, they would be constrained if the IBC is used as a tool, because 29A would forbid the promoters and lenders to come together. So all these put together offer many challenges for the IBC. Unfortunately, and another reason, which is again a macro reason, if I may say, is that IBC had just about taken off. The wheels had just left the ground. And unfortunately, the wind has been taken out of the wings of the IBC, and it has been forced to ground. And it would not be easy for it to take off again so easily in such a fragile state. It took 3 years of massive effort, almost the entire might of the government, to make IBC successful despite its challenges, immense amount of jurisprudence, and therefore you will not find that all that might one will be able to put behind that law so easily, given the distractions that the government would have and other priorities that the government would have. And from a optics point of view, also the government politically would not also want to be seen to be too harsh, would not want to be seen to be whimsical in terms of so emphatically investing in a law when there are other areas which need its attention, given the aftermath of the COVID-19. All these put together, therefore, will shift the center of gravity of the insolvency to the out-of-court restructurings. And there are three tools that are likely to gather momentum. One is the June 2019 circular of the RBI, which obviously will itself have to be revisited. It will have to be tweaked. In particular, if the IBC provisions are suspended, then the provisioning norms will have to be changed. And also, any which ways, a greater relaxation will have to be provided in order to make it more efficient, effective, and user-friendly. The second is the Sashaks. Again, that is something which has not really gathered dust as a rolling stone, and the government would want that also to start working. At least in the public sector banks, you will see some more attention being paid to Sashaks being made. And the third, which the government is currently thinking on, is the pre-packs. Now, the pre-packs, of course, we all know is a hybrid of an out-of-court, and a formal restructuring process, which means that a plan is actually proposed by the lenders together with an investor or with the existing management or promoters or investors. And then once it is agreed by the requisite number of lenders, then it is placed before a formal court for a stamp of approval so that it becomes enforceable in law. Now, that, of course, would require an amendment in the IBC. And, of course, we would require to create an infrastructure for that. We would require capacity building for that. So that also is not something which is going to start working from the day one. But having said that, that is something which was in the pipeline. And it's a good tool. It has been used extensively in UK, US, Australia in particular. Lately, the experience has not been very well. So UK has stepped back significantly. So has Australia from the pre-packs. I don't know, this is not a discussion on pre-packs, so I don't want to delve on the reasons as to why. But I'm sure India can address those drawbacks and learn from the experiences of the other countries. And pre-pack can also find its way as far as the out-of-court restructurings and then formally getting approved at the NCLT level are concerned. Now, this is as far as the out-of-court restructuring emerging as one of the major platform for the restructurings to take place. Obviously, with its own flaws and handicaps, it will have its own drawbacks as well. But given the fact that IBC is preferably seen to be as a more deficient tool in the circumstances, the government is likely to be cautious on the insolvency. But the very reason why the ordinance has been delayed also shows that the government is not really wanting to go on an overdrive on this. There are certain issues. I am not privy to that discussion, but there are two in particular why I think that the ordinance has been delayed and the government might be having rethinking or might just also be wanting certain tweaks. One is that all the news around the change has been more about IBC on the corporate side, the provisions being suspended. But we all know that as regard the personal guarantors and personal insolvency provision had been also notified. Now, if those are not silenced, then the challenge is that if the lenders continue to go after the promoters by invoking the personal guarantees, then the promoters would be deeply engaged in dealing with their personal insolvency, and they would not be able to focus on the corporate insolvency restructuring. And that also would not really be fair to the whole process and would not be equitable and may defeat the purpose of Section 7, 9, being, and even 10 for that matter, being suspended. So I don't know what the thinking of the government on that is. The second reason why ordinance is something which there is a school of thought. There are some people who believe is not a good idea. People think that suspension is an extreme step, and perhaps the government should raise the bar further and not deprive the lenders of using IBC also, and maybe 500 crores or certain specific industries should still be left to go through IBC, because that is the only way and process through which you can have a global tender and global investors to come in. And through the process outside the IBC, at least the challenge would be that the promoters would make it very difficult to make the restructuring successful or even go through, because they would be at the helm of the affairs, and they may not cooperate, and they may also create obstacles, and therefore where you may have actually investors willing to come forward, or that were in the pipeline, because sometimes the lenders are also able to pull investors in. You may actually be adversely affected by IBC not being available. So there is a flip side to the story as well. There is the other side of the coin, and I think that is also a lot of people have represented. At the same point of time, some lenders are vehemently wanting IBC to be suspended. Those are largely because IBC is again something which many lenders were not really very excited about. They had a lot of frustration with the timeline and the cost, and therefore they see this as an opportunity to get the control back with the lenders in terms of the decision making. So there's a lot currently which is fluid, and you will see that it's not going to be easy for the government to take decisions with competing interests of stakeholders, with various stakeholders talking in different language and pulling government in different directions. So that is broadly at the macro level. Now, if you see at the micro level, and I'll take about 15 minutes on the micro level. At the micro level, if you talk about the IBC's impact, what I think is highly disruptive quality, and that would be in a way an understatement as well, because I think it has almost undone all that had been done over the last 3 years. And speaking of how this, if I may use a very casual expression, that it has actually taken the fizz out of the IBC, and it's hard to restore it back to the status quo ante. My sense is that we should reconcile to the fact that it will cause a deep impact on a large number of stakeholders. And let me make a 3-4 minutes comment on each. As far as the IPs are concerned, obviously, from a futuristic point of view, it will cause a deep impact on the flow of work. Those people who had invested immensely in setting up IPEs or law firms that had actually set up insolvency departments are already thinking whether they should really continue to hold on or start looking at other opportunities. If the provisions are suspended and the ordinance comes into effect, even if it is for 6 months, and even if it is actually lifted after 3 months, the fact is that the damage would have been done, and a lot of people would find it hard to sustain the big practices that they had established, people they had hired, and people to hold on to the same profile. And those who actually were waiting for the opportunities to come, who had patiently waited for 2-3 years, would obviously start losing hope as well. But the other side of the brighter side of this is that the lenders would cut down on the costs significantly, and actually smaller firms may get more opportunity, because the bigger firms will not find it viable to really work on smaller fees, and they always have the option to move to other areas, because I do believe that M&A activity and investor activity will continue to happen. Although one has to be mindful as well that this is also a time of a geopolitical shift globally. The power equations globally are changing. China, US, the world is realigning itself, and therefore many countries will be cautious very cautious about taking an investment from certain countries, from certain block of countries, or the sectors in which the investment may be made. I'm not just limiting it to China, where the government has already significantly indicated that those sectors which are open for China to invest through automatic route also will have to go through the approval route. But that is just China, but there are other countries which the government would also be very mindful of, and therefore you will see that a greater cautious approach means that the M&A activity also, although will be there, but it will significantly slow down. But we always know that there are people who look for opportunities to invest in these kind of times, although at a very lower price. So activity will continue to take place. I also feel that the IPs will also face a lot of challenge in trying to restabilize the entities that they are in charge of as an IIP or an RP or a liquidator. A lot of things would have slipped from under their hands, even though they were in charge or in control. Obviously, I'm not talking about physically slipping through. It's because the cash flows would have been significantly impacted. We would have seen payments from suppliers becoming uncertain, or at least not coming in time. Are also going to be impacted. There are contracts that may not be honored on either side. And therefore, there is going to be huge disruption, and stabilization will become a big challenge. And so would be the valuations, and there will be a huge demand for revisiting the valuations, even not just in those cases where the resolution applicants have already been submitted and are under consideration of the COC, or where the COCs have approved them but not been sanctified by the NCLT, and even not just those which have been approved by the NCLT, but are under implementation. In all those cases, of course, there is going to be every chance of they coming back, either asking for withdrawal or asking for relaxations or revisiting the terms or being granted more time. But I'm also talking of even those cases where valuations have been done, but resolution plans have not been submitted to the COC, or at least not put to board, because there also one will have to take a realistic call. Now, whether that is done by asking for revaluations to be done, or by the lenders actually getting their own independent assessment done to be able to take a more pragmatic shot at it. But the other risk is that in most of those cases, if the valuations are not good, or the valuations are good, but the price offered is low, the lenders would keep pushing the can down the lane, and they would just sort of delay the inevitable and hope that this can be settled outside with the promoters, and you'll see a spike in Section 12A applications as well. So there is a lot of churn that is going to happen as a result of the valuations being impacted very significantly. I also feel that as far as the lenders are concerned, they have their own compulsions as to why their expectations are mostly, not aligned and realistic in terms of what is offered, and that is because they feel, one, they have their own accountability, and two, they do believe that down the years, the resolution applicant will actually be able to make money, and there'll be cash, and why should they not be given a value for that now, being deprived down the line? And they're not willing to take any equity. And when the resolution applicants say that, why don't you then take an equity? If you see a turnaround happening and cash starting to come in, then you take an equity rather than as a cash exit. But then the lenders want the best of both the world. So lenders also will have to be very realistic, very pragmatic, very, very careful and cautious. They will have to be also not just legalistic in the whole thing. They will have to be equitable. I'm not saying compassionate, but certainly they will have to revisit their strategies as well. And now NCLTs and courts also will have to really revisit their entire strategy, because the entire jurisprudence that has developed so far in the last 4-5 months in particular um, by the Supreme Court is brutally in favor of the lenders. And in doing so, the Supreme Court actually walked the other end of the spectrum, very contrary to how the global best practices are. and something which I have been very critical of, because I do believe, and I have written it in my articles and my book, that IBC cannot work dehorse social, cultural, and human aspects. And if you see IBC as a commercial tool only, even though its importance is largely economic, it sits in the heart of the financial architecture, is essentially a commercial law. But the fact is that it has an orbit system in which it operates. It operates not just in the economy, but in the society. It operates as a cultural influence and of course, also on humans as we sit here and speak when it comes to jobs and other aspects. So surely, you will see that the Supreme Court would be constrained to revisit its jurisprudence. And if the Supreme Court doesn't do that, you will see High Court intervening in Article 226 jurisdiction, because the challenge is that you will see that a lot of people will invoke force majeure clauses, which the NCLT doesn't have the jurisdiction to decide as a question of law. They will go purely by the terms of the contract and the IBC provisions. They will not see what the interpretation of force majeure is. And ultimately, the parties may just invoke the writ jurisdictions of High Court and ask it to interpret and use it as an Article 21, Article 19 constitutional issue, because they will say it directly impairs the life and liberties of people. And in these extraordinary circumstances, the force majeure should also not be seen as too technical a word. It should not be read very inclusive. It should be read as exclusive. It should be more generously interpreted. There are no precedents globally of force majeure clauses being used for a pandemic. We've seen war, acts of war, and a number of other cases. There's a huge jurisprudence, but on pandemic, there's nothing significant. And quite clearly, there be no precedent. You will see that the courts would be asked to interpret what force majeure would be. And also in those cases where force majeure clause do not exist at all in the contracts, and people may not be technically able to rely on the force majeure clause, you will see that the parties will rely on the doctrine of frustration or doctrine of impossibility under the Contract Act, and plead to the courts that we were prevented physically and legally both on account of the orders passed under the National Disaster Management Act by the government, and therefore it was beyond their control physically or even legally to be able to discharge their obligations under a contract. And therefore you will see that as a result of that jurisprudence, a lot will outcome. And if NCLTs are not able to present, the parties act unreasonably, they will approach the High Court, and that will also be very damaging to the IBC, because one of the things that IBC succeeded very significantly in doing the first year was to keep the High Courts away and the other courts away. And if you invite them back, it would really undo all the damage, or all the good that has been done on that aspect at least. I do hope that as far as the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is concerned, my advice to them has been twofold. Cross-border insolvency, they're focusing too much on this point in time. They should really put it on the back burner. I'm not saying they should not do it. I've been one of the propounders of cross-border insolvency, having given them the draft bill together with Mr. Viswanathan about 3 years ago. But my advice to them at this point in time would be to keep it on the back burner, and work on the draft regulations, if capacity building, training, but not notified for at least next 6 months. The other advice that I have to the government is the ministry is to actually stop using IBC aggressively as a tool or as a ladder to climb up the ease of doing business ranking for the government. IBC has been the main instrument that has been used to spike India's ranking, which of course is nothing wrong. Of course, we all want India to climb up, but that has created an overly pressure on the IBC. And the government has been very aggressive, in my opinion, in introducing changes just so that they could get more scores on the ease of doing business ranking. We need to go soft. We need to soften down our approach on that. IBBI will also have to really relook at its strategy. They will have to ease the pressure on the IPs. There is too much of compliance pressure, too much of paperwork, too much of that. I was on a webinar about 4 or 5 days ago where Dr. Mukulita said that we have taken a conscious call. We will not do any disciplinary proceedings for non-compliances during the lockdown period, but that is not adequate. I think they will need to, for future, also step back a little bit and give breathing time to the IPs who need to focus on stabilizing back their companies and to focus more on rebuilding the industry rather than go after them on even minor defaults as they've been doing in order to discipline. Um, uh, so essentially, these are some of the things. Just a couple of things that I want to mention before we open it for Q&A is that the there are some confusions with regard to how that 1 crore versus 1 lakh works retrospectively or prospectively. I just want to spend 2 minutes on that. That works prospectively. It cannot be retrospective. So those cases that had already been filed but not admitted on the basis of a default less than 1 crore, they would still need to be admitted. Unless, of course, the government decides to suspend, then the challenge is that even if those have been filed but not admitted, you will see practically the NCLTs wanting to persuade the applicants to withdraw the case because they will say that, look, the entire industry is getting shut under the IBC for 6 months, and the reason for that is that you won't have investors or you don't want to create pressure. So why would you want to unnecessarily, for a small default, create a problem? And they legally, though they may be bound to admit it, but they will surely see that there's not going to be any outcome, and therefore either the parties will settle or you will see that there'll be a pushback from the NCLT. And essentially, these are some of the comments that I had as how the spectrum is going to change. It's going to be, we're in for some very difficult time. But every difficult time like this also offers an opportunity to reinvent, to think afresh out of the box. And I'm sure we will see something good coming out of all this as well. A lot of corrections that are required to be made will also happen. So these are opening comments, and I can take questions for about 10 to 15 minutes, and maybe then last 3-4 minutes I can talk about the cinema aspect.
Friend, Sumant sir, thank you for the wonderful deliberation. These are the hard facts, actually, being as an insolvency professional, which we must keep in mind. You see, the world is definitely going to change on the IBC perspective also post this COVID. So, with this, I open to the question and answer session. We have few questions in the chat box. We have one from CA Rahul Gupta. If you can see, sir. How a well-defined law of land IBC be challenged before honorable court. There are three stages of CIP: resolution plan at advanced stage of negotiation in COC meeting. Resolution plan is approved by COC pending approval by NCLT. Resolution plan is approved by NCLT. How and at what stage RA can ask for negotiation on the edge of valuation and all? As we also spoke of that valuation might need to be revisited. Sir, your take on this question.
Okay, so I think this is going to be the most delicate part of the activity going forward. Let me deal with all the 3 stages, starting from the third, because that's the most challenging one. Because the plan that has already been approved by NCLTs under implementation may have already been partly implemented, and Section 474, and there are other provisions that require that there has to be an implementation. Now, NCLT cannot and does not have the jurisdiction to do anything. So even if an application is moved by a resolution applicant, NCLT will not be able to do anything, nor will the Supreme Court or the NCLAT. The only way the plan perhaps can be modified, there are no precedents to that effect, but there are precedents reported as a part of the NCLT process, but we have seen outside the NCLT where the parties by mutual consent agreed to modify the terms, and lenders agree, okay, fine, if the next installment was due in May, why don't you pay it in October? Or even maybe reducing it, or maybe, in terms of the valuations, revisiting it. It's not going to be easy because the fact is that there is a court order and the lenders will not want to take their responsibility. So you will see applications coming forward to NCLT and wanting NCLT to interpret that in the current times, NCLT should exercise its jurisdiction and hold that they have the power. That's not going to happen. And that's where you will see that people will end up with high courts using force majeure. There are already reports that notices have been sent by most of these residential applicants invoking force majeure clause, even though it may not be very specific on the pandemic, but they are invoking. And so therefore, that is the most delicate part, because that will end up either in NCLTs or high courts. And you will see different high courts taking different approaches. And depending on how aggressive or how flexible the lenders are, you will see things happening. My sense is that from a personal point of view, I don't want to really speak too much on this, because I would be advising lenders or resolution applicants. I am advising, so I don't want to say anything that I may be quoted later on in time to say that you said that. But certainly, the only one comment that I'd like to make is that we need to take a realistic view on this, not legalistic, because if we get stuck on legalistic, it's going to be hard, because Section 74, 73, subsection 4, and the law is very clear that there has to be a willful default. And if the parties say that I did not intend to default, I never intended, I actually have acted on the plan and or intended to act on the plan, but I was prevented from doing so by COVID. Therefore, cannot be held to be a willful default any which ways. And that being so the case, they can say, okay, fine. I mean, there's no other way you can force anybody to actually implement it. So people will take realistic situation. Now, the second stage is where the COC has approved and the NCLT may not have approved. Invariably, you will see parties coming forward and wanting the plan to be withdrawn. And we have seen instances in the past like that, where even lenders have gone and withdrawn. It has happened in Liberty's case, although the matter is pending in Supreme Court. So we were in the meantime allowed to invite fresh plans. The challenge is that most of the cases, the process memorandum says that you cannot modify the plan once you have submitted it. But that's the COC call. And again, if the COC allows them to revisit the plan and pragmatically and fairly do it, why not? And the same situation basically would extend to the first case as well. Now, the only caution that I have is that, while we should be realistic, objective in taking an approach towards these reforms that come in, they should also not become a reason for abuse the process. And somebody just because has a change of mind, somebody just because they have developed cold feet or have second thoughts about it, they should not really be allowed to use as a force majeure or any other way to step back or withdraw or change. It is only if one is able to genuinely show and demonstrate on the basis of the facts that they are unable to implement or the valuations have changed, only then. So abuse has to be prevented.
Right, sir. It's very true that abuse has to be prevented. So we have one more question with the another question from Kamal and Jan. He says that do you feel that Section 10 cases should be allowed with some relaxation in Section 29A, because out of court settlement will just be possible for banks and not other lenders or creditors?
Oh, I think so, yes. I think so, yes. I mean, if you ask for my opinion, I am against the IBC being suspended. It will cause too much of damage, to the insolvency industry. I think we are mature enough as an economy to decide that which case should be brought to IBC and which should be. Now, one section in the IBC that has not been used effectively is something which we need to use, is where it is stated, and I'm forgetting the name of the section, that number of the section, that IBC can only be used for insolvency, restructuring, and liquidation. Resolution and liquidation, it cannot be used for any other purpose. So, if someone just files a default for a 1 crore, 1.5 crore, and the other lenders are willing to support restructuring and feel that the company should not go into insolvency, the NCLTs will have to hold that we cannot allow admission, because the fact is that most of the lenders are against admission, and they believe that the company is in a good hand and it can continue and disrupt. And this is, although of course contrary to some of the judgments of the Supreme Court, but the fact remains that, as I said, jurisprudence will have to be revisited. And look at the damage this suspension will cause to the IPs, to all those people who are invested in the technology, to support IPs, to the various other stakeholders, the whole infrastructure that has been created. I don't think we need to do the extreme step, but that's entirely government's prerogative. They have the better view of the situation than I have. And of course, whatever they do, will be wholeheartedly support that. But I feel that whether it's Section 10, 9, or 7, they should be retained. And the NCLT should really be admitting only those cases where all the lenders are supportive, because they feel that that's the only way you can actually salvage things.
Thank you. So we have Mr. Ramesh asking that for focusing on excessive focus on IP's procedural role by IBBI without touching other players' code of conduct like lenders and genuine difficulty faced by IP at every stage. So, sir, remarks by you on this.
Well, yes, I mean, I do believe that there has to be a balancing act by the IBBI. While, yes, IBBI needs to keep a watch on the IPs, that's their job. They also need to sort of make sure that best practices develop, compliances take place, and the industry develops with high standards. But I also feel that IBBI at times go overboard in terms of focusing on two minor issues and spending their energies on rather trivial issues. And I've seen that once the issue are noticed, then there is also a position where they unfortunately are not willing to accept that they could also be wrong, and they invariably, start end up passing some stricture or censure or order against the IP. Very rarely do they accept the explanations, especially after the proceedings have started. I mean, of course, when they issue general explanations, etc., these are also warnings in a way, some way. But IBBI certainly will need to step back, as I've said that. Unfortunately, they don't have any jurisdiction over the COC, so therefore they can't really about it. It is the industry that should come forward and develop best practices for lenders, COC best practices, code of conduct. IBBI can't do anything about it. There was a move by IBBI to do that. And actually, about 1.5 years back, all working group meeting, actually a workshop on this. And there were lenders present, even I was present, and we all actually opposed vehemently that it was beyond IBBI's jurisdiction. It is for RBI or IBA and the Credit Association to inform that, and IBBI should work closely with them and persuade them to come out with the code of conduct for the COC.
All right, sir. So we have few questions on the increase of 1 crore threshold limit. So I'll read the three questions. One is from Sasiji. He says that whether it will be challenged. Then we have Kanwalji asking that what would be the remedy to the operation creditor. I mean, and then we Saurabh Jan is having a concern that whether this 1 crore limit will be reverted back to 1 lakh, and because it's also he's also worried about the fact that the financial creditor has not taken any action under the Negotiable Instrument Act because they had a remedy under this IBC. So, and that is now barred by the limitation. So, what is the remedy to the financial creditor in such scenarios? So, your take on this question.
So, you see, the lifting of the pecuniary bar is it's a policy prerogative, and this is a substantive provision, enabling provision that existed in the law, which allows the central government to increase it from the amount that was already there, and which they've exercised as a power. So and there is no constitutional issue involved in this at all. This is entirely the prerogative of the policymakers. It is not for the court to decide what should be the threshold: 1 lakh, 50 lakh, 1 crore, or 5 crore. It doesn't raise any constitutional issue at all. In fact, there has been, on the contrary, criticism that 1 lakh is too low, and IBC therefore is flooded with so many cases where defaults are of very insignificant amount, and there was any which ways some discussion for a very long time to wait for the right opportunity to increase it, and that has happened. I don't really see this being reverted back to 1 lakh. Uh, in fact, the government has been wanting to do something for the SME sector for a very long time. We all know that they have been very badly affected, and the economy being in the state it was, the government has been thinking of measures. There was an amendment brought out in the IBC as well earlier to exclude the applicability of certain provisions in the IBC for the SMEs. So this is here to stay, is what my opinion is. I lost your voice, Louisa.
Yeah, sorry. So what will happen to the financial creditor? I mean, who missed the case, who missed the filing of cases under Negotiable Instrument Act, and now the case are you see time barred. I mean, is there any other remedy for them?
They always have a remedy of going to DRT or to take other recourse to other remedies that they have under the financial instruments. So the lenders are and the Negotiable Instruments Act is any which was not a recovery process. It's a criminal proceeding. So while they may have lost it in certain cases, but they still are not commercially affected in terms of their remedies being taken away under the law for recovery of the money. So IBC is only for restructuring and not for recovery. So therefore, this will not really impact in any manner. And I think this is, as I said, is here to stay. And most of the lenders are going to be fine. Yes, I understand that it would cause a concern for small lenders or small operational creditors. But in a way, it's also a correction, because I think the NCLT got too burdened with small cases, taking too much of time, and maybe to begin with, this may be fine. And at the same point in time, I think one of the other things that the government which must also consider is a kind of a mechanism for restructuring of the small and medium enterprise. There is a big gap there. And 2-3 days back, we had a call as a group. There is a project that is happening currently globally, which is a support by the UK government under the Commonwealth program, which they are extending to the government of India to help strengthen the insolvency industry. I'm heading the team on the insolvency side, and we had a discussion on what we need to do in the current times. And one of the things that we have discussed that we should take up the government is as to how the SME sector, especially the partnerships and the proprietorships or small enterprises, even if they're companies, which either fall below 1 crore or which would find any which ways, even if the default is above 1 crore, IBC is a too tedious process, too comprehensive, too costly to give them an alternate forum. Although most of the banks do have a kind of a framework, but that is not used effectively. So surely that is another area which needs to be then focused on in some way to make up for this vacuum that will be created for some stakeholders.
Yes, yes. Definitely, Hemaji just says actually that, I mean, how do the SME survive if their threshold limit is 1 crore? It might be end of road for them, and biggest sufferer are the OP. But yes, as Sumant sir has rightly said that yes, we have to cope with these changes, and these changes are here to stay. So we have one question from Navneet Gupta, that could IT play a role in restructuring by way of some regulation changes or any other legislative changes in the view of possible suspension of Section 7, 9, and 10?
No, unfortunately, you see, if the provisions are suspended, that is 7, 9, 10, any which ways, then you're talking only the future cases. The current cases which are going on will have to be governed by the substantive provisions of the code, and regulations only fall in line with those. Regulations do not permit IPs to do anything other than just act as managers of the CIP process or to manage the enterprise to stabilize it. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court judgments have recently only curtailed the roles of the IPs, which is very sad, because I have always seen IP's role much greater and wider than what Supreme Court has seen it, and the way even the government was willing to accept the Supreme Court judgment, and unfortunately, it does not allow the IPs to use their optimum abilities to help in the restructuring. Their role has shrunk to becoming more symbolic, and that's unfair because we have some very good professionals who know turnaround, and they can use their capabilities. The people who have worked in various enterprises as on different jobs and capacities and have helped restructure. So, they're deprived to use that skill. But sadly, IBBI as a framework doesn't permit that. But going back to my opening comments on how the industry focus will shift to the out of court restructurings, many of the IPs will also have to explore career opportunities in that segment, and should really be also looking at smaller cases. Invariably, out of court restructuring has been monopolized by a handful of 5 to 7 or 10 firms in the past. I don't want to name any, but you will see that doors opening for smaller firms as well on the restructuring. So if one door will shut, I'm sure the others are going to open.
Yes, rightly said. We have to explore the other option. You see, we as an IP cannot keep be rather immune to the changes which the world will be seeing post COVID. And the last question we have, in case of suspension or filing of new cases for next 6 to 12 months, given the reluctance of the bank, do we really see the IBC coming back with the same force thereafter, or it is the gradual closure of the process over time?
I wouldn't really take a very extreme step of saying that it's the end of the road for IBC. I do believe, as I've said earlier, that it has caused a major setback to IBC, and it will take a lot of effort to bring it back to its feet again. In particular, if it shuts down for 6 months. But if better sense prevails and provisions are not suspended, as currently contemplated, I do believe that we will be able to avoid a lot of damage. But the fact is that IBC as a law, as an instrument, is a great necessity for the economy. It will come back. It might just require another great push by all of us. And if the government continues to maintain its energy levels on IBBI and on IBC, I think we should really be able to come back with flying colors. Obviously, we'll have to go through some struggle in the meantime in that process, but life is never without struggle in which ways.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. I think this will give some hope to this. You see, the IP is present over here. Definitely will come back. Definitely, you see, they'll find a way to cope with this. You see, sudden change in our profession. But yes, we have to see the global picture that unless the business is there, no profession or no services could survive. So with this, I think we do not have more question for you.
Okay, so
and sir, before,
yeah.
yes, so, sir, before, yes, I am coming back to that. So we just want a 5 minute of you when we are very much inquisitive on that.
I'm happy to talk about that as well. So just for the information, everyone, I've been a cinema lover for a very long time, and I and my wife are collectors of cinema memorabilia for about 10 years, and we are one of the largest collectors in the world. We have a huge collection of film information and material, for example, not just posters or film booklets or lobby cards or film magazines, newspapers, old films, projectors, and books. Huge. We have a huge material, and about 1 year back, we decided to do something with it because not just very valuable financially, but the information that we have is probably something which doesn't exist even with the National Film Archive of India. And we therefore decided to undertake this project. It is called as Cinemazi. I just typed it in reply to Advocate Saurabh Jain's by mistake, the website. So what we are doing is 4 things. One, we have set up the first private archive on Indian cinema. Nowhere else in the world a private archive in Indian cinema exists. So this is something which is almost like a research center. Anybody who's writing a book, anybody who's researching, film school people, anybody who's making a film, actually can visit our archive and sit there and research. And we get actually students from and professors from universities abroad as well who come and sit there for weeks, go through our data. We have material not just in Hindi or Hindi cinema, but regional cinema as well. And we have literature going back to 1930s, 20s as well. And the second thing that we're doing is we're creating the first digital encyclopedia of Indian cinema. So the idea is to document every single film made in this country from 1913s onward, be it in any language. Every single person who's worked in cinema, on screen, off screen, we are documenting the life and filmography of those people. This will take about 4 to 5 years, but the process has started, and you will see we've already made significant progress in Hindi cinema as well as Punjabi and others. This is, of course, a massive task, almost that borders impossibility, but it's aspirational yet doable. 4 or 5 years. The third thing that we are doing is we also are storytelling, because we have so much information and material. We just don't want to sort of put it in the factual form. We are, in order to connect with the young, in order to sort of be as relevant for the film lovers, cinema buffs, and fans, and not just for the scholars and historians. We are, creating a lot of visual products and audiovisual products, so that the young people also know about the rich history and heritage of Indian cinema. Because at the end of the day, our project is to document the rich history and heritage of Indian cinema. So you will see we do a lot of videos on by way of storytelling and broadcasts as well. And the fourth part of our project is the Cinema Memory Project, where we are actually meeting and interviewing the family members of who were in the cinema very long back, who have passed away 30 years, 40 years back also. But their family members are holding on to some memories or information and document them. Those people also allow us to scan the things that they have, be it the handwritten scripts, notes, screenplays, family photographs, shooting photographs, old films, music, whatever it is. Because all that then we put in our archive. It's a massive project, very aspirational. And my wife handles the visual content development part. We have a team of 14 people working full time with us on this, and 18 people around the country as regional cinema consultants. It's a not-for-profit project being done by my foundation NGO. And the whole idea was to create a legacy, um, continue the legacy of people of the past who made Indian cinema what it is today, who laid the foundation of Indian cinema, who made beautiful movies, beautiful songs, who made India proud, but their memories have been lost on the time. The young generation is not familiar with them at all. And we just want to sort of save all this for the future generation. And it's purely out of our love for Indian cinema. It takes a little bit of my time, a lot of money, of course, but it's wonderful to be in the middle of all this. And I normally don't write myself as much on cinema, but yesterday I did write a piece on Tisri Kasam, a film that was made in 1966, which was written by a very prominent writer of that point in time, Renu. If you would like to read it, do read it. The website is called as cinemazi.com. Cine, of course, for cinema, Mazi for the past in Urdu. And if you're a lover of cinema, do follow us on our social handles, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook page, and of course, browse through the website to see the amazing visuals of people, information about people you would have never heard of, people who made beautiful music in 30s, 40s, beautiful films in 30s, 40s, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
Thank you, sir. Well, it was a great to know a very interesting part of you. We always knew Sumant Batra as the insolvency, you see. But now, yes, it's a very exciting part. And we are fortunate that I have asked you this question. And thank you, sir. I mean, while you were speaking on this, I have also visited the site. It's a wonderful site. Please do visit, and definitely it's a great work which is being done by Sumant sir. And with this, we come to end of this session. And now may I request our Joint Secretary, Anup Kumar Batra, to kindly offer Sumant sir for his wonderful deliberation of formal vote of thanks. Anupji.
All, I
Yes.
express my gratitude to Mr.
Anupji, you are muted. Yeah, please, you can start again.
Yeah. Good afternoon, friends. It is a great honor and privilege to me to propose a hearty vote of thanks on this event. First of all, I express my gratitude to Mr. Sumant Batra sir for sparing your valuable time and enlightening us by your word of wisdom. I extend my most sincere thanks to all participants and also mention my deep sense of appreciation for the entire ACI team for organizing this event. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you once again for this wonderful session. Thank you.